Citizenship on the Go. Lesson 3. American History, 1800 through the Civil War. Part 2. Territorial Expansion and Arguments about Slavery. In the early 1800s, since the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, did not prohibit slavery, in practice, whether slavery was considered illegal or legal in any given state was left up to the state governments. Many politicians and lawyers of the time argued that because slavery was not prohibited by the Founding Fathers at the Constitutional Convention, legal decisions about slavery should continue to be left up to individual state governments. They pointed to the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which are called the Bill of Rights, to back up their argument. The final article of the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment, says that states are allowed whatever decision-making powers the Constitution doesn't specify belong to the federal government. Throughout U.S. history, lawmakers in different states have made very different decisions about issues that are not mentioned in the Constitution. In the early 1800s, after Whitney's cotton gin led to a boom in plantation slave labor, state governments in the South passed laws in favor of expanding slavery. By that time, by contrast, 8 state governments in the North had passed legislation outlawing or restricting slavery. Because the 10th Amendment states that the powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or to the people, as long as the Constitution did not explicitly lay down federal laws about slavery, each state government was authorized to pass its own laws about slavery. In the early 1800s, laws about slavery varied greatly from state to state. Southern state legislatures took measures to maintain slavery in their jurisdictions. Some northerly states located around the borderline between the North and the South of the United States, such as Delaware and Maryland, also passed laws reinforcing slavery as an institution. And in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., slavery remained legal, though hotly debated. Civics Test Question: What is the purpose of the 10th Amendment? What is the purpose of the 10th Amendment? Powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or to the people. The 10th Amendment states that the powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or to the people, allowing for the creation of many laws and regulations that differ from state to state. As state governments made increasingly different laws about slavery, the social divide between the North and the South grew. States with governments that made laws abolishing or restricting slavery within their borders were known as free states. As the United States expanded westward, many new free states were added in the northern part of the country. Despite being called free states, most states with laws restricting slavery didn't immediately free everyone working as slaves. Instead, the governments of most free states enacted gradual abolition of slavery, making it illegal for people to be kept in slavery only if they were past a certain age, or if they had been born after a certain date. This is why the census map for 1850 shows that some people in New Jersey, for example, were still living in slavery after it became a free state. Still, as more states in the North passed laws restricting slavery, the slave trade became a topic of frequent debate at the federal level of U.S. government. Senators and House representatives argued about whether they should create national laws ending slavery. Many pro-slavery groups in the South began to worry that pro-abolition congressmen would eventually win the debate and the federal government would make slavery illegal throughout the nation. Some Southerners claimed that if the federal government made laws against slavery, it would be taking away the 10th Amendment rights of states that wanted to make laws keeping slavery. Civics test question. Name one power of the U.S. Congress. Name one power of the U.S. Congress. Writes laws. The U.S. Congress, or the U.S. Legislature, writes laws. While the 10th Amendment to the Constitution gives state governments the power to make many regulations about matters that are not mentioned in the supreme law of the land, laws that apply to all states and territories in the United States are written by senators and by House representatives in the federal legislative branch, or the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress also has the power to make the federal budget, periodically deciding how much of the federal government's available money will be spent on certain programs or services. According to the Constitution, the U.S. Congress is also the part of government with the power to declare war. For the United States to officially go to war, senators and House representatives must vote to authorize a declaration of war. In the 1800s, Southern states that wanted slavery to remain legal were called slave states. Some landowners and businessmen in slave states saw the federal government as a threat. Plantation owners and other Americans in the South said that if the federal government took away state governments' rights to decide about the issue of slavery, it would be like when the British government denied the 13 original colonies the right to self-government. Slave state legislators who took this view claimed their liberty was at stake. Even though Southern states had senators and representatives in Congress, many Southerners felt that the federal government was too powerful. They worried that lawmakers from the North would make many decisions unpopular with Southern landowners, particularly about the slave trade. People who held this opinion said that fighting a war to keep slavery legal would be worth it. They compared the situation of the South to the situation of the American colonies that had been under British rule. Even though slavery was not one of the problems that led to the Revolutionary War, some Southerners said that taking a stand against the U.S. government in the 1800s would be similar to what the Founding Fathers had done when they'd adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence had said the United States is free from Great Britain. Now, in the 1800s, some groups in the South were considering making a similar declaration. This time, however, the South would be saying it was free from the United States. This political cartoon from the 1860s was drawn by a Southerner who wanted the slave states to declare independence from the United States. The depiction of the slave states as a snake is based on a famous cartoon Benjamin Franklin had published almost 100 years earlier to encourage the colonies to work together for freedom from British rule. In the 1700s, American colonists had declared independence from Britain and fought the Revolutionary War because of taxation without representation, and because they did not have self-government. The artist of the later cartoon believed that the Bill of Rights gave state governments the power to make their own laws about slavery. He suspected, however, that the U.S. government was going to go against the 10th Amendment as he understood it and take away slave states' rights to make these kinds of decisions. In publishing this picture, the artist was encouraging people who wanted to keep slavery to fight for independence from the U.S. government. The South's push to secede or break away from the United States because of disagreements about slavery led to the Civil War, fought by the South against the North. When this cartoon was published, slave states in the USA included some of the original 13 states, such as South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. Other slave states had joined the United States later as the country added more land to the territory under its control. New slave states included Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and many others located in the southern region of the country. Civics test question. What war did the Americans fight to win independence from Britain? What war did the Americans fight to win independence from Britain? Revolutionary War. In the 1700s, Americans fought the Revolutionary War to win independence from Britain. Before the American Revolution, the 13 original colonies were under British control. After the war, they were no longer colonies, they were states. The Revolutionary War, or American Revolution, is also called the War for Independence because the Americans in the 13 colonies fought this war for independence from Britain. Civics test question. Name one reason why the Americans declared independence from Britain. Name one reason why the Americans declared independence from Britain. Taxation without representation. Americans declared independence from Britain and fought the Revolutionary War because of taxation without representation. Colonists were required to pay high taxes to the British king and his parliament, even though the colonies did not have representation in parliament, and they did not have self-government. Americans declared independence from Britain as a result of many actions taken by the British government. British soldiers staying in Americans' houses, a practice called boarding or quartering, led many colonists to oppose British rule. Hostilities between the British military and American colonists were increased by events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and many colonists decided to support American independence because of legislation they saw as unfair, such as the Tea Act, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts, and what Americans called the Intolerable or the Coercive Acts. Most of these acts of the British government were related to taxation without representation. Civics test question. Name the U.S. war between the North and the South. Name the U.S. war between the North and the South. The Civil War. The North fought the South in the Civil War largely because of disagreements about federal and state slavery laws in the United States. People in government in several states in the South were concerned that the U.S. federal government would restrict slavery or make it illegal altogether. They announced that their states were not part of the U.S. anymore, but instead part of a new country with a separate government that would allow slavery to be legal forever. People in many states in the North remained loyal to the Union and supported the U.S. military when it fought back against Southern attacks, leading to the Civil War fought between the North and the South. In the 1800s, a big issue that lawmakers from the North and from the South frequently argued about was what should happen in U.S. territories. As you can see on this mid-19th century map of the United States, Many parts of the USA in 1850 were neither slave states nor free states. These areas of the country were not states at all. They were territories. Even though these territories were officially a part of the United States, they didn't have senators or voting representatives in the House of Representatives. In 1850, the government had not yet decided whether slavery would be legal or illegal in the territories. Just like they argued about the powers of state governments, lawmakers in Congress argued about whether territorial governments should make decisions about slavery for themselves, or whether the federal government should be the one to set the rules about slavery for every new piece of land the United States acquired. To try to stop the North and the South from fighting, Congress made several compromises that expanded slavery in Southern territories and restricted slavery in Northern territories. These compromises were not successful in stopping the arguing, however. After each compromise, what mainly happened was that Americans who wanted slavery to be abolished everywhere grew more and more angry that Congress was letting it expand in Southern territories, while Americans who wanted slavery to be permitted everywhere grew more and more angry about Congress restricting slavery in Northern territories. You may be wondering how all these territories were added to the United States in the first place. A major event that contributed to the country's growth in size in the 1800s was the purchase of what was known as the Louisiana Territory. This international deal was made around the start of the 19th century. To be more specific, in 1803, the U.S. government bought a huge piece of land called Louisiana from the French government. At the time of this deal, Thomas Jefferson was the President of the United States. Jefferson was a very influential founding father. He was the main writer of the Declaration of Independence. After the United States succeeded in becoming an independent nation, Jefferson was elected as the country's third president. One power of the president, as chief diplomat of the United States, is to sign treaties. And in 1803, Jefferson authorized the signing of a treaty with France buying the Louisiana Territory. Congress has the power to reject treaties signed by the president, but in this case there was no rejection. The Senate and the House of Representatives were happy to approve the Louisiana Purchase because they considered the deal to be a very good one for the United States. Adding the Louisiana Territory to the area under U.S. control doubled the size of the country on paper. The Louisiana Territory included not only most of what's now the state of Louisiana in the South, but also large parts of 14 other present-day states, stretching all the way up to Canada, as well as a small section of land currently on the other side of the Canadian border. As soon as Jefferson authorized the deal with France in 1803, thousands of people from U.S. states on the East Coast began moving into the territory in search of economic opportunity. Civics Test Question: What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? Louisiana. The United States bought Louisiana, or the Louisiana Territory, from France in 1803. Civics Test Question: Thomas Jefferson is famous for many things. Name one. Thomas Jefferson is famous for many things. Name one. Doubled the size of the United States. As President of the United States at the time of the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson is credited with doubling the size of the United States. During the 2 terms he served as third President of the United States, Jefferson did other things for which he is remembered, but he is also famous for things he did before he was president and after his time in the presidency ended. Jefferson was the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence. He was the first Secretary of State for the United States. He founded the University of Virginia, and he was the writer of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom. Civics Test Question. Name one power of the President. Name one power of the President. Chief Diplomat. The U.S. President is Chief Diplomat of the United States, giving the President the power to negotiate certain kinds of deals and treaties with other countries. The President also has the power to sign bills into law or to veto bills. As head of the executive branch of the government, the President has the power to enforce laws. The President is also Commander-in-Chief of the military, and the President has the power to appoint federal judges, such as Supreme Court justices. When the United States bought the Louisiana Territory from France, Thomas Jefferson and other government officials were not making a deal for empty land. People had already been living in the area the Europeans called Louisiana for many centuries before people from Britain, France, and other countries in Europe were even aware the Americas existed. From 1803 onward, the westward movement of settlers from eastern U.S. states and the expansionist policies of the U.S. government resulted in many conflicts and disputes with Native Americans living near the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Native American tribes based in the area the French named Louisiana had no say in the treaty France made with the U.S., but after the treaty was signed, they were told their homelands now belonged to the United States. Pictured here are some notable Native American people born in the 1800s who lived in what we now call South Dakota and Oklahoma, modern-day states that fall within the borders of the Louisiana Territory. Sitka Lasha was a musician and a Native American and women's rights activist of the Sioux, or the Dakota, people. Wolf on the Hill was a leader of people in the Cheyenne tribe, and John Wilson was a Caddo medicine man. People of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Caddo nations, as well as thousands of other Native American or American Indian people living in the 1800s in areas we now call South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and more, were personally impacted by U.S. government decisions like the Louisiana Purchase. They witnessed many of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, of U.S. westward expansion, and of the Civil War firsthand. Many were forced by the U.S. government to leave their homelands and abandon traditional ways of life in order to meet U.S. regulations and social expectations. People of the Sioux Nation, the Cheyenne Nation, and other American Indian tribes in the present day continue to petition the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of U.S. government to address major problems caused by the government's unfair treatment of Native Americans throughout U.S. history. Civics Test Question. Who lived in America before the Europeans arrived? Who lived in America before the Europeans arrived? American Indians. Before Europeans arrived in North and South America, American Indians, or Native Americans, lived throughout these continents. Civics Test Question. Name one American Indian tribe in the United States. Name one American Indian tribe in the United States. Sioux. There are many tribes in the United States which officially go by the name Sioux. Most members of Sioux tribes in the present day live in South Dakota, Nebraska, or Minnesota, states corresponding to areas of land that were added to the United States as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Other American Indian tribes traditionally based in states added to the United States following the Louisiana Purchase include the Caddo Nation and the Cheyenne tribe. There are more than 500 American Indian tribes officially recognized by the U.S. government today. In the 19th century, as the federal government of the United States added Louisiana and other territories to the area under its control, Mexican and U.S. military forces clashed repeatedly over ownership of land in western North America. In 1845, the United States annexed, or officially took over, Texas. A few years later, after many battles between the U.S. and Mexican armies, the Mexican government signed a peace treaty giving up several other territories to the United States government. As can be seen on the map, the United States now stretched across the continent from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Pacific Ocean in the west. In 1853, another treaty between the U.S. and Mexican governments, called the Gadsden Purchase, added yet more previously Mexico-controlled territory to the United States, and created the southern border we have today. Going by present-day political boundaries, there are 4 U.S. states that share a border with Mexico. From east to west, the 4 modern U.S. states that border Mexico are Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Civics test question. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s. The Mexican-American War. After gaining independence from Britain in the 1700s, the United States fought several wars in the 1800s. In the 1800s, the U.S. military fought the British military again in the War of 1812. The U.S. clashed with Mexico in the Mexican-American War, and the U.S. Army and Navy also waged war against the Empire of Spain in the Spanish-American War. The Civil War of the 1800s was different from these other wars because in the Civil War, the U.S. military didn't go up against another country. Instead, the North of the United States fought the South of the United States. The Civil War was a war fought by Americans against other Americans. In most territories added to the United States in the South in the 1800s, the slave trade was at first legal. As the United States expanded westward and slavery expanded with it, however, anti-slavery feeling grew in many cities and towns of the United States. People who wanted to end or abolish slavery often argued that it was an inhumane activity. They pointed out that the slave trade made a practice of ripping families apart. They said that until abolition was achieved, the United States would be going against its own supposed founding principles in denying enslaved people many basic rights the Constitution was supposed to guarantee all Americans. Many of the people who spoke out against slavery in the 1800s were Black Americans who had been enslaved themselves. Some abolitionists who had been raised in slavery, like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, became well known to readers of American newspapers for widely reported public speeches against slavery that drew from their personal, first-hand experience. Sojourner Truth, for example, told audiences how enslavers took her son away from her, and how even after she had legally gained her own freedom, she had to fight in court to get her child back. Harriet Tubman described in detail the frequent violent physical abuse her enslavers put her through as a child and as a young woman, up to the moment she made her escape from slavery. Today, Harriet Tubman is most famous for the dangerous work she did as scout and guide on the Underground Railroad, helping many other people escape from slavery. The Underground Railroad was not literally a subterranean train track. Instead, it was a series of secret routes and safe hideaways that abolitionists used to help tens of thousands of enslaved people escape to free states and territories, as well as to Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Although thousands used the Underground Railroad to escape their enslavers, in the 1700s and early 1800s, enslaved people were classified as property by the federal government no matter where they ran. The Constitution contained a clause requiring that anyone who broke state law by fleeing their place of labor be returned on request to the person from whom they had escaped, even if the runaway laborer had made it to a free state or territory. However, especially as the abolitionist movement gained energy, the general population of many northern states refused to comply with this clause. White abolitionists in the North collaborated with Black abolitionists like Harriet Tubman to secretly support people escaping from slavery as they fled to the safety of places that would not force them to go back to their enslavers. Many white abolitionists who became publicly well known as political protest writers and public speakers, like Lucretia Mott and Susan B. Anthony, supported Harriet Tubman and other organizers of the Underground Railroad by secretly contributing resources and arranging for safe places to stay along the routes taken by those escaping from slavery. Many abolitionists in the 1800s were also dedicated to the cause of obtaining civil rights. Tubman, Truth, Mott, Anthony, and other outspoken American abolitionists, like Lucy Stone and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, pointed out that slavery was only one of many legal and social barriers in the United States that needed to be overcome before all people could truly enjoy the rights and freedoms supported by the Declaration of Independence and promised by the U.S. Constitution. Civil rights activists in the 1800s pushed for federal, state, and local legislatures to make laws to protect the access of all people to civic infrastructure, a free press, educational opportunities, and job opportunities, no matter their race or economic background. As part of the movement for civil rights, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and other civil rights activists of the 1800s also took notable leadership roles in the women's rights movement of the time. Abolitionists were concerned with securing an end to slavery for Black women as well as for Black men, but they were also concerned with the rights of women who were not enslaved. In the 1800s, women in the United States did not have the right to vote in federal elections, and opportunities to receive a formal education, take part in government, own property, and enter higher-paying sectors of the workforce were much more limited even for white women than they were for white men. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and many other leaders of the women's rights movement in the 1800s argued that constitutional rights of all people living in the United States, such as freedom of assembly and freedom of expression, belonged to women as much as to men. They also fought for women's right to vote in local, state, and federal elections. In 1838, the British Empire abolished slavery in its Caribbean colonies, partly thanks to the influence of internationally known American abolitionists like Sojourner Truth and Lucretia Mott. At the time that Britain made slavery illegal in the West Indies, there were more than 1,300 abolitionist organizations around the United States pushing for the U.S. Congress to make the same kind of change to the law, and 2 million Americans signed anti-slavery petitions. But as lawmakers in the American South pushed back strongly against abolitionist activity, the movement to end slavery was still considered controversial, much like the related movement for increased civil rights for free men and the growing movement for women's rights. Civics Test Question. Name one leader of the women's rights movement in the 1800s. Name one leader of the women's rights movement in the 1800s. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is remembered for her participation in the Underground Railroad and in the push to end slavery in the United States, but she was also a leader of the movement for women's rights in other regards in the 1800s. Other leaders of the women's rights movement in the 1800s included Sojourner Truth, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucy Stone. It took decades of hard work done by thousands of Americans, but eventually, protests for women's rights organized by Tubman, Truth, Mott, Anthony, Cady Stanton, Stone, and others influenced enough lawmakers in the United States to support women's rights as citizens for an amendment to be added to the Constitution, giving women the right to vote in federal elections.